Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Duke Football Coverage Podcast, brought to you as always by Bull City Coordinators. I'm going to skip the intro that I normally do because you guys have listened enough. You know how to get a hold of me. You know where our website is, and you know what my email address and Twitter accounts are. I just want to get straight to the interview because when we talked to Kobe Cofield, I teased this, and now it is time to bring on a first for us, a former position coach, everybody's favorite former offensive line coach, I think, in Duke football history. We have Coach John Latina on the phone with us. I'm going to skip all the intro that I normally do and just get right down to business. Thank you for coming on, sir, and how are you?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and visit about, hopefully, Duke football.
We will definitely get into that, but one thing that I noticed in getting ready for today, and I like to save the Duke football till a little bit later on, just so I can get through some of the stuff that I want to cover in background and give people a reason to stay and listen to the whole thing. I noticed that you coached and played at Virginia Tech back some time ago. When were you there?
Wow, that was a long time ago. That was my freshman season was 1975. And I was a four-year letterman and finished in 4 years, but stayed on as a graduate assistant. Got started in the coaching profession there at Virginia Tech, and I stayed there 3 more seasons.
Now, what was Blacksburg like back then? Because I'm sure it didn't look anything like it does today.
Well, no, it was very small, and literally it was nothing but campus, really, in the surrounding area as well. It was very small and remote, and it was a beautiful place as it is still today, but it's grown so much since those days.
Oh, absolutely. It's got a bunch of student complexes. It's got the vet program. It's got just about everything you could want in a college university town.
Yeah, no, I loved my time there, but it wasn't much there. It was just academics and football.
Well, tell us a little bit about what you're up to now. What are you doing these days?
Well, I've been retired. When I left Duke after the 15th season, I left in February of 16, got through the recruiting process, and then moved back to my wife's hometown, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of Pittsburgh. And we've been living here and kind of enjoying our old friends and reacquainting ourselves with family and friends, and for the last 5 going on 6 years.
Well, you mentioned reacquainting yourself with family and friends, and I want to get to this because as a trial lawyer, sometimes I have to miss out on stuff with the family to go try cases and be out of the office and travel. What's that like for you as a coach when you're trying to balance the responsibilities of big-time coaching and family life?
Well, it is a difficult task, but you do the best you can. When I say reacquaint with friends and family, I mean that because when you are at a college football coach, especially at those levels, your time is so consumed with the job and then recruiting and so whatever time I would have available, we always tried to give it to family. It was just about the family, and so your friends kind of got put on the shelf. They'd come and visit you sometimes, come see a game, but for the most part, you basically put everything on a shelf and devoted your time to job and family, immediate family.
I'm going to go a little off track here because I want to continue to explore this. One thing that has been very educational for me in these interviews that I've done, particularly the last one with Joe Ajibi talking about the academics at Duke and what it was like for a student athlete. I want to know a little bit more from your perspective what the hardest part about being a coach is and what we as fans or followers of the program should know to help us be better fans and more supportive of the program about what it's like to be a coach.
Well, obviously, we all know and have heard about the time constraints that you have. You sit there early in the morning, and I was an early morning guy, so I literally would get to the office 4:30, 4:45, and start my day without anybody else being there for the most part, just to do things that I felt was necessary for me, study-wise or whatever. And but then you're there till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. So it's a pretty long day, and it's a lot of film work. It's a lot of planning for the prepping for that day's practice. And then at nighttime, you're preparing for the game plan and getting ready for the game all the way from Monday on. So, it never ends. And then you do have the most important part of the day is the time you have with meeting your players and going over the plan and going over video and then getting on the field and, implementing that plan and trying to get it as sharp as you can before Saturday.
How do you deal from a health perspective with the stress and the time-consuming nature and demands of that position?
Well, I never thought of that as being as hard as a lot of people think that it would be. You're so consumed in it. Every second of your day is allotted to some particular thing, so you don't really think about it. You just kind of you're just on a go mode, and all you're worried about is accomplishing whatever the task is at hand, whether it's studying film, whether it's preparing for the practice, whether you're at practice, and then at nighttime watching the practice a second time because you watched it live, and you come back in and you watch it again, and then you start preparing for the game. And that's all fun because it's different segments and you're doing different things. So it's not as monotonous as you may think because you're there for 14-hour days. It's broken down into different phases where you're spending a couple hours here and a couple hours there. And so it flows very well. And I think that helps you through the day and helps you through that process.
How important is your wife to all of this, getting you through the demands of the job and the recruiting and the game day? How important is she to everything?
Well, extremely important. Now, you can't function without a tremendous, incredible wife, spouse, and they wear a lot of hats because you're not there to wear that hat a lot of the time. So they're the father, the mother, they do everything. And for it to go as well for you in the office, you have to have peace at home knowing that everything is being taken care of. So that's one of the biggest things going for you if you have a great spouse that's very understanding.
Well, let me switch gears a bit because if I keep talking about how important the wife is, I think my wife might use this to remind me and make me feel bad and shame me some, and I don't need that more than I already get it. But I want to ask how you ended up playing football. What got you into football?
I grew up in an area, the Newcastle area, that football was, and I think it is in a lot of parts around the country, but in Western Pennsylvania back in that time frame, it was huge. Friday nights were huge, and so you grew up as a little kid going to games, and then when you get a little older and start playing junior high and high school, but it was just a part of our way. It was a part of our way of life here in this area, and you looked up to the guys that you went to watch when you were 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, and couldn't wait to be that person where everybody came to watch you play.
Well, you finish college and you're thinking about what you want to do next. What made you say, I'm going to go into coaching?
Well, I always felt, even as a younger high school freshman, sophomore year, I always felt like I wanted to be a coach. You never know what level you're going to end up, and not even know what sport. I loved playing baseball. I loved coaching baseball. I actually coached a little league team that was 9 to 12-year-old when I was 16. I was the head coach, but I always felt like that was something I wanted to do, working with kids and mentoring and see if you can make them better somehow, some way, each individual player. It's quite a challenge because you deal with so many different personalities, and you have to find that balance. That intrigued me at an early age. And even when I played and went to Virginia Tech and played, I really paid attention to the coaches and their ways of coaching and how they tried to deal with individual players. That was always fun for me, and it was a challenge.
It's funny you mentioned you were coaching in high school. I was an assistant coach for a YMCA team my senior year at high school, and to this day, the first game that I got to coach by myself, which we won, and I'm still very proud of it. But I'm still bitter over 20 years later about a call that the official called on the floor when our point guard, Scott Brannon, was in the air shooting the ball when he called it, and he called it on the floor, and we didn't get to shoot free throws. Now,
it's hard to let those go.
We were about 20% from the line at the half, and so you can imagine what my halftime speech was directed around. They shot 80% in the second half, and we won the game. So it was a good day. But that's great. The thing that I've always liked about coaching is the problem solving. It gives you a chance to really develop your skills in relating to people and making things run smoother. And I always liked that. I don't know if you had a similar experience with that or not.
Yeah, I think problem solving is a great way to put it. And when you're a coach and that's your full-time job and you're at a level that we're talking about, I mean, you're problem solving with their off-the-field issues, their academic issues, and certainly what you get paid to do, their on-the-field issues. So hopefully you become pretty good at problem solving.
Now, my senior year in my high school career was spent at Daniel High School, which I think you might be familiar with because,
sure.
Yeah, you were coaching at Clemson for part of almost all of my time in junior high and high school, I believe. What years were you at Clemson?
I was there. I got there in 1994. I think 94, 5. The 95 season might have been my first year. It's hard to say. It's kind of running together. 95 through 99, I think.
So you would have been there when Tommy West was the head coach, correct?
Yeah, I was Tommy's line coach at his whole time there. Yeah, which was 5 seasons.
What did you growing up in Central, just outside of Clemson? I remember Danny Ford as kind of a semi-mythical figure. Of course, he won the national title there, and then Ken Hatfield comes over, and he wasn't Danny Ford, so people weren't really thrilled with him, even though he had a good track record. And I kind of felt when Tommy West came in that he was, looking back on it, he was in a really tough spot because they wanted someone to be Danny Ford, and like a lot of coaches, Danny Ford was a unique guy, and you couldn't really replicate him. Did you guys ever feel any pressure like that, or did you notice any pressure in him? I mean, what was he like as a coach?
I mean, I thought he handled it really well. We had some good years there, but we never really had any great years. If you remember back at that time frame, Florida State was just incredible.
Yeah.
And it was hard for us to get past them. But we had some good years. I think we went to 4 bowl games in the 5 years, but nothing great. And you mentioned Coach Ford. Coach Ford was my offensive line coach my first 2 years at Virginia Tech.
Really?
Yeah. So you sent goose pimples all over me when you mentioned Danny Ford.
Well, he is living in Central now, I believe. Tell us a little bit about what he was like as a coach. But before you do that, you guys weren't the only one who couldn't beat Florida State back then. That was an exclusive club of everybody who struggled with that. But tell us a little bit about Coach Ford. What was he like?
Coach Ford was very demanding. practiced extremely, extremely hard, and he was very demanding. I mean, literally all effort. His big thing was effort. His thing was toughness. He was a good football coach, but toughness and effort and attitude was, to me, the biggest things that. And I already mentioned to you that I always paid attention to how different coaches coached, and I wanted to take that from Coach Ford. Coach kids hard, coach them tough, demanding, and be physical. And I still think football is a game of physical football, but physical play, and the people who can't hold on to that, even though you see the ball thrown around all over the field, you still have to have physical football. And that's one of the things I learned from Coach Ford, how important that was, and I wanted to always have a tough physical offensive line.
Well, I think one of the best things anybody in any career can do is to look at those around them who are successful and who do things the right way and steal as much of that as possible. As an attorney, and I've said this before on the podcast, I'll say it again, plagiarism gets a bad rap. Okay? I mean, the more you're around great people and soak up their habits. I mean, I wrote a letter to one of my mentors, legal mentors, recently and said, I never realized until I left the firm and went to the place that I'm working at now, the law firm I'm at now, how many of your phrases and ways of speaking I stole from you and how helpful they are.
Right.
And I think anybody who's in any position in their life needs to be observant and learn from those around them.
Well, I agree, and that's just utilizing the experience around you. Experience is really an important phase in everybody's life, especially coaching. So when you get around veteran coaches, when you're a young coach or when you're a player, you're foolish not to pay attention and try to do the things that they do.
Well, let's switch gears from your time at Clemson, which I remember you guys beating the Blue Devils pretty consistently back then, so we won't relive that. But it's actually kind of funny, though. When you were there, I think, is when Clemson started to become the big college town that it is today. It was expanding the sidewalks, cleaning it up. All the apartments started moving out into Central and some of the other undeveloped areas, which, you were talking about what Virginia Tech was like when you were there. I think it's grown in similar ways to the way that Clemson grew. But you leave Clemson. Tell us how you ended up at Ole Miss.
That's a really interesting. I really don't know for sure. I didn't know David Cutcliffe. He had just got the job at Ole Miss, the head football job, and I didn't know him. We had a mutual friend, and that was an administrator at Tennessee that knew David, and he recommended me, obviously, and I never interviewed for the job. He called and offered me the job, and I went to work for him. And for 6 years at Ole Miss with David, and I had 4 years at Duke, so I had 10 years with him, and 10 of the best years I had in coaching.
Well, so what was your what positions were you coaching? What were the hats you were wearing during your time at Ole Miss?
Well, I started off as the line coach. David ran the offense because we were all pretty new to the system. Then after that first year, he named me the coordinator, right? And I stayed as the offensive line coach and was the coordinator as well. I had great help with Kurt Roper, who is a dear friend and was our quarterback coach. So when basically Kurt and I shared that duty, I wanted Kurt to call the plays, primarily because I think when you coach the line, your focus has to be on the line. And so Kurt called the plays. We did all the film study through the week, put all the plays on the game card, and Kurt called it. Of course, I can always chirp in and say, hey, let's do this or let's do that, as well as Coach Cutcliffe could. And So it worked out well. We worked well together. But the last 5 years, I was his coordinator and offensive line coach and assistant head coach. Every title you can come up with, I guess.
Well, tell us a little bit about you got maybe 3 or 4 guys who were, trying to put the offense together, and in any organization that can cause some problems with egos. How do you guys manage that as a coaching staff?
Well, with Kurt, it worked extremely well. Kurt was a big reason why I came to Duke, as well as Coach Cutcliffe, because I knew that our relationship and how we worked well together, and that's probably one of the most important things to me, that you have people working together instead of, like you're alluding to. It's hard to get. I want to do this and I want to do that, and we need to do that. So it worked well. Kurt basically handled the passing game. I handled the run game, and the only thing I can do is if there was a protection that he wanted to put in that I didn't feel comfortable with, we just wouldn't put that in. We'd have to do it. We'd have to run those routes in some other protection scheme. So it worked out beautifully. Kurt was really young and probably didn't have as much hard-headedness, I guess I should say. When you get to be an older coach, it's hard to change, and so Kurt it was great. It was beautiful, and again, when they had the opening, I went because I knew it would be a great working relationship with David and Kurt.
Well, I'm sure your job was a lot easier with Eli Manning under center than it maybe was at some other times in your career at other places. That couldn't hurt to have a guy like him playing quarterback for you. But what was the biggest challenge that you guys faced when you were at Ole Miss?
The biggest challenge, like a lot of places that aren't the very best in the country, just trying to be that. Our biggest challenge was, the Southeastern Conference, especially the Western Division of the Southeastern Conference, is you got to man up each and every week, and you got to be at your very best. And if you do lose a couple key players, can you replace them with guys good enough to win in that conference? And we had some great years there. We went to 5 bowl games, and we lost to LSU 1 year to go represent the West. It was Coach Saban was there, and they ended up winning the national championship. And so we were close, and we had some really good teams and some really good seasons. But it's a challenge. In that conference, that's a tough conference.
Well, I think that was the year you guys went to the Cotton Bowl, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we played Oklahoma State in the Cotton Bowl.
What was Eli like as a player?
He's a dream in terms of a guy that obviously I didn't coach him. I coached the line, but it wasn't just his physical tools that he had that made you feel great. He literally so far ahead of so many people mentally, and literally a coach on the field, a coordinator on the field. And when your quarterback has the chalk last and he's functional to get you in and out of bad situations, it's really a big bonus.
So you guys were at Ole Miss until the end of the 2004 season. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
I want to ask a little bit about that ending there, because we all know that as a coach at any institution, for the most part, the general rule of thumb is you have a short shelf life. What was it like when you guys were told, thanks, but your services are no longer needed? I mean, I can't imagine that's easy for you guys on a personal level, because you all are competitors and you have a drive to succeed. But from a family perspective, what's that like to face having to uproot and move somewhere else and kind of start over again?
Well, that's your biggest concern as a coach is when you're taking kids out of your children out of schools and relocating them into a different region of the country, and your wives have to go and learn and be around and meet and become friends with new people. It's easy for the coaches. We get in the room, and whether we know each other prior to, you have one common goal, and you go to work. And so for coaches, it's easy. But for the children and for your spouse, it takes a little time to adjust.
Well, how did Coach Cutt and you guys handle the dismissal when it happened? I mean, we all heard that there were demands that he change the staff, let some people go. He said no to that. How was that process like for you guys, and did you all have a sense that the end was kind of around the corner for you?
I think most of us sensed it. Being as a little bit older coach, not old yet, but I saw the disconnect between the athletic director and our football program. And I just, we had a different athletic director when we got there. It changed hands, and it was never, to me, something that was on the same page. And so I felt like as soon as we didn't have a really good year, they would do that. And sure enough, they did.
When you're a coach, what is your first thought when you see an athletic director changeover?
Well, you worry about so many things, and a lot of it's out of your hands, so you can't spend your day worrying about it. But you worry about, do they have somebody that they love and want to be the head football coach of that program? Just them being around somebody that they have great trust in and wanting their own guy. Everybody kind of wants their own guy. And so it hits you early that you better play well and you better do well, or else things aren't going to last long.
And I know you've been at a number of different schools, but when that happens and there is an AD change, does that seep into preparations? Do you guys as coaches talk about that? Does it put you on edge? I mean, just on a day-to-day basis, how does that work?
It really doesn't come up. You kind of know it. I know the Ole Miss situation. David and I talked numerous times about it, but other than short little conversations together, you don't talk about it. You don't worry about it. It's out of your hands, and you have enough to worry about that you better take control over, and that's where your focus goes. It's all about the players, and it's about putting them in the best position to win games, and so you don't let that consume you. I never worried about it a day. Really, nothing you do about it.
Well, tell us, you went to Notre Dame and to Akron after Ole Miss. Is that right?
I did. I did go to Notre Dame for 4 seasons, and then I went to Akron for 2. Akron's about an hour away from my home, and at that time, I went to Akron instead of going to a couple other opportunities I had. One was Florida, believe it or not, with Will Muschamp. I was thinking at that time I was ready to finish my career, and being an hour away from where I grew up and knowing I was going to come back to this area, I thought it was going to be, and a good friend got the head job, a really close friend who was on our Notre Dame staff, Rob Ianello. I just thought it would be a good way to, maybe finish there and be close to home and be kind of neat. It just didn't work that way.
Well, you go from recruiting at Ole Miss to recruiting at Notre Dame and then recruiting at Akron. I was just looking at that. What's the process like when you are maybe one day recruiting for School A and then the next day you're recruiting for School B?
Well, every school has different, first of all, different entrance requirements and different academic standards. And so, it starts there, because if you can't get them in school and if you can't meet those requirements, then, you're wasting your time. But, Notre Dame and Duke, Duke's as you know, a great academic institution. You got to go in and recruit. You got to look at their grades first before you get too far along in the process, or you waste a lot of time.
What was coaching at Notre Dame like?
You know what? It was great. Growing up in the area I grew up in was a big Notre Dame fan, so I was a Notre Dame fan somewhat, and it was something that was really neat, for me, and being 5 hours away from home, which was really one of the closest places that I've ever worked in terms of proximity to my area, where my brothers and my family can come and be a part of. That was kind of neat in itself. But the tradition there is, you do sense it, you do notice it, and it was a great. I enjoyed my time there.
What was the biggest challenge at Notre Dame?
I think the biggest challenge to me was you literally had to recruit the entire country. You get spread really thin as a guy who has, like, I might have had 6 states to recruit, and it gets hard, and so you go into Florida. Urban Meyer was in Florida, and they were winning championships. You had to go to Florida and try to beat Urban Meyer on the best kid in Florida, and then you had to go to Texas and beat Mac Brown on the best kid in Texas, and on and on and on. California, which is a hotbed of football, and Pete Carroll was there. So you had to go into the state, and those are states that I mentioned where it's really, really rich in talent. Florida, Texas, and California, and you had to go in and to get the top kid and beat them. That's pretty hard to do. I think Brian Kelly's done an outstanding job. Since he's been there, he's won 10 games or more multiple times. It's not an easy job, and he's done a nice job with it.
So other than the recruiting across the country, I'm just curious, when you said it's not an easy job, what else would you tell us about what makes that job at Notre Dame not an easy job?
I mean, I really do think it's the recruiting and how well you can recruit and get the very top kids in the country in there, because it's a place that obviously there's a lot of demands on you. You feel that you gotta, you feel like you have to be a contender for the playoff nowadays. They got playoffs. Back then it was BCS bowl games, and we were fortunate to play in 2 of those. But you just know you got to win 10, 11 games every year. And everybody wants to upset Notre Dame. Everybody is gunning for you. So you got to be at your best.
Well, I want to ask you about that, about being at your best, and everybody is gunning for Notre Dame. And one of the things I've learned from doing these interviews is a lot about being patient with everybody. You were at some schools with some very demanding fan bases. Clemson, obviously, Notre Dame's another. Does that add a layer of complexity to what you guys are doing?
Well, it shouldn't, but it does. I think it's human nature that you're aware of everything. You're aware of the noise, if you will, out there, and from alums and from Clemson. They got I think it's Phil Kornblut that has a radio show 365 days out of the year about South Carolina and Clemson recruiting, and so you hear the noise. You try to tune it out, but it's hard. It's human nature, and it's hard not to pay attention to that stuff.
Right, and I think it's got to be especially demanding when you have a job that's nationally televised.
Yeah, as Notre Dame is, and Notre Dame has a fan base that reaches international, and people let you know when they don't, when they're not happy with you, they're going to let you know it, and so you hear it, you know it. You just try to put it aside and go back to do the best that you're capable of doing.
Right, and I'm, as a fan, certainly have been guilty of that, and I'm trying to be better. with that, and listening to folks like you and a lot of the players that I've had on, it's been very helpful to understand what you guys are going through to help me, take a deep breath and say, come on, let's just relax a little bit. So I appreciate you guys helping me with that. But I want to switch gears now and get into Duke football. What made you come to Duke?
It was people. It was, and it started at the very top. And I mean top, I met Dr. White. Dr. White was at Notre Dame when I was there, and I thought he was one of the greatest leaders I've ever been around. And knowing he was at Duke, and my relationship with David Cutcliffe, and so you had Kevin White, you had David Cutcliffe, and as I said, Kurt Roper, who was the offensive coordinator, I knew I wasn't going to go into a room and clash and battle every day. I knew it was going to be together, and I'm going to give you another reason too. I knew that the offensive line were coached well. Okay, I have a lot of respect for Matt Luke. I actually coached Matt Luke one game, and then he was my GA at Ole Miss for a year. And I have a lot of respect for Matt, and I knew what they were taught, and I knew they were taught well.
Now, I've got a couple of things I want to follow up on with you that you brought up, but Coach Cutcliffe was supposed to be with you at Notre Dame. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. He did. We went up there together.
And then he had some heart issues and ended up going back to Tennessee after that. You were at Notre Dame and Akron, so you guys reunite there. You mentioned Matt Luke, and I'm going to veer off from the Duke conversation for a second. He's obviously one of your guys, one of the people that you helped mentor and bring along. What was that like when he was told he was no? What was that like for you when he was told he was no longer going to be the head coach at Ole Miss? I mean, is that hard on you as somebody who helped one of your guys?
Well, it hurt me. I felt I was sick to my stomach. I know how much Matt loves Ole Miss, and I know that was true. Everybody talks about I got this job and it's a dream job. That was truly a dream job for Matt, and I know how much he put into it. And I felt for him because I know how much it meant to him to be the head coach at Ole Miss.
I think that was short-sighted on Ole Miss's part, but obviously I'm not an athletic director and I'm not there day to day, but he seemed like he was doing a lot of the right things and was steering the program in the right direction. And sometimes real leadership is being patient and not making the snap reaction that everybody's looking for. But
I agree with that, and that's why I mentioned Dr. White, how important it was that he was there, because I think he is one of the greatest leaders I've ever been around. And if you don't have great leadership at the top, it's hard to survive and do well in this profession.
Tell us a little bit with him stepping down. How do you think, if at all, it will affect the athletic program going forward?
I'd be very surprised if it affects it in any way. Obviously, Nina has been with him at Notre Dame and with him at Duke and mentored by him. I'm sure he will be a sounding board for her when she has tough questions or tough decisions. But I think it'll go as seamless and as smooth a transition as it can go.
Tell us a little bit about Nina King, what we need to know about her and what we should expect from her, because all the reports from former players, current players, media people has been the same, which is positive. I don't think anybody has had anything negative to say at all, which is very unusual. Tell us what we should know about her.
Well, I can't sit here and say I know her really well. I was two places where she was, but football is kind of isolated from the rest of the world, if you will. And in our few times together, I always thought she was such a smart, very nice person. Goal-oriented, driven. I think she will do a great job. And again, being under Dr. White all those years, she's more than ready, and I'm happy for her to get that opportunity. And I'm happy for Duke that she's going to be in that role.
Well, so you come to Duke, and obviously it wasn't then at the level that it got to when you were there, and it wasn't historically a great football program. I grew up watching it, and we could talk about all the painful losses I remember watching as a kid with my dad, but I don't need to relive a lot of those at the moment. But what did you get to Durham? You get there. What was it like compared to some of the other places that you had been at?
I thought we had a really good staff. I thought Coach Cutt assembled a really good group of guys that were good football coaches, but really worked well together. And I think that's so important when you're in a place that you're rebuilding and you're trying to do something that hasn't been done. Having that kind of unity and togetherness and everybody on the same page is so critical. And I thought it started there. I thought there was some good young talent in the program. I know they had a couple. I think he was there 4 years before I got there, 3 or 4 years. And but you can see they had some good young talent on the team when I got there. I mean, really young freshmen, redshirt freshmen. And that was exciting to me because they were going to be around for a few years, and you have a chance to develop them and get them better each and every season, and each and every from fall to spring back to the summer workouts. And it takes that kind of time to build younger players, and you have time. One of the greatest lessons I ever learned in coaching was at Kansas State. I was on Bill Snyder's first staff, and when he took over the worst program in the history of college football and turned it into a top 15 program. And the patience and the stick-to-itiveness, all those cliches that are really important, and we just stuck to our guns and got better each and every segment of the year, and eventually we became a good football team.
Well, you mentioned Bill Snyder, and I'm going to diverge a little bit from talking about Duke, but I'm curious about this. Do you think that a guy like Bill Snyder would be given the opportunity to pull off what he did at K-State back when he did it, or do you think that people are just too impatient now with programs?
That's a good question, but there's always a but. Our president was so much behind our program. Our athletic director, name was Steve Miller, who became a senior vice president of Nike. Great visionary, great leadership. I mean, we had the greatest leadership from the president to the athletic director you can ever want. And that is as big a reason why, to me, that program got turned as any other reason. The staff was good. Coach Snyder was tremendous. But I can go on for hours about what Dr. Weefald, the president of Kansas State, did to help our program become successful.
Well, it sounds like what you've been driving at this whole time is that it takes patience and leadership from the top to turn around. Well, what is it about college football, though, that seems to make that so rare?
The noise. If you know the coaches are getting it, you know that the president's getting all the big donors chirping in their ears, and the athletic directors, and it gets hard for them to, of course, And sometimes when they stay the course, they lose their jobs.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because we saw what happened at Duke when people were patient, and you guys went on a magical run, and we're going to get into that in a minute. I'm just curious, when you come to Duke, and I've heard about how demanding the academics are at Duke. Tell us a little bit about what that's like for a student athlete, and also for you as a coach, helping your players through that process.
Well, I mean, it goes back to recruiting. You're recruiting a better student, one that can compete in that classroom with the other students that they have to compete against. So it starts there. You better get a kid that's capable of going in there and competing like he does on the field. As long as you're recruiting good academic kids with good grades at good schools and take real good core courses, they'll be successful at Duke because of the support system, the academic help that the support system provides, the one-on-one attention and tutoring. So if you get a kid with great character, and Coach Cutt used to say this all the time, we got to take character kids that are going to do the work to do the right things and try, and they'll be successful. And I give them credit. Sometimes we wanted to take a kid that was a better player, and he may have said, I like this other guy. Daniel Jones may be the greatest example. He was the one guy in the room, and he was the head coach that demanded we take Daniel. And was he ever right?
So tell us about that. Tell us what that recruiting decision came down to.
Well, we had a kid commit, and I was just getting ready to leave. So I was there 1 year with Daniel, and I can't remember the other quarterback that we had committed.
I think it was Jack Spear.
Say his name again?
It was Spear or Sear, something like that.
No, he was already there. No, it was a kid from Connecticut.
Quentin Harris.
Quentin Harris, yeah. I apologize, Quentin, if you ever hear this. Great kid, and we already had him committed. And normally you take one quarterback, normally, and that's the way Kurt liked to do it. And that's the way Coach Cutt always liked to do it too. But when he started watching Daniel, he kept coming in and being persistent, and we were hesitant not because of Daniel as much as we already had one committed. Now you recruit another one. Does that make Quentin mad? Does that do you upset the apple cart there? So you gotta weigh all those things. And Coach Cutt was just headstrong, and he didn't want to mandate it, but eventually we did get him in the program. It actually came as a walk-on. Then we lost a scholarship kid in the summer, and then put Daniel on. A lot of people may not know Daniel came agreed to come on as a walk-on.
Well, we thank Coach Cutcliffe for his persistence, because he was fun to watch when he was wearing Duke blue.
Yeah, I like for him to have been the quarterback behind my lines.
Well, you guys had some good quarterbacks there.
We did. No doubt. We did. We had really good quarterbacks.
Yeah, you had Anthony Boone, Brandon Kinnett, Thomas Sirk, who was on here. And speaking of a guy who you could tell was a leader, when he was recounting the 4 overtime victory against your alma mater, I got pretty excited. What was that game like for you?
Well, I mean, we went up to Blacksburg and beat them twice up there, and really my first year in 2012, if you remember, we were up like 24-7 at halftime.
Yeah.
And then the tables turned. We couldn't do much on offense, and we couldn't stop them on defense. But we should have beaten them all 3 times up there. But we did beat them twice, and it was it's one of the biggest wins that I always cherish. Those 2 games at Blacksburg.
Well, the 2013 win offense was optional for that game. A lot of interceptions, defense were hitting everybody, and then that 2015 game was the exact opposite of that. Those 2 games, I remember them. They were a heck of a lot of fun, and it was great as a fan. It was a big moment, I think, for what you guys were doing. In that 2013 season, when did you guys feel like, hey, we might be able to do something special?
I think as an offensive staff, because we had conversations, we felt like we can have a magical year. And we thought our defense was going to play well, and we felt like we became very balanced. I felt like we were going to run the ball for close to 200 yards a game, and I thought we were going to throw for 250 yards a game, and put points on the board and be to me, great offenses have great balance, where you can decide what you want to do and not be pigeonholed into doing one or the other. And we had really, really good balanced offenses.
Well, when it came down to a close game in 2013, you had the wild card in Devon Edwards. What was he like to have on your team?
Yes, Devon's a special human being and a special athlete, and just put the ball in his hands somehow, some way, and good things are going to happen. Whether it was kicking games, special teams, you want the ball in his hands. I mean, he won so many games for us by returning kicks or returning for touchdowns or getting us into good field position. But what a tremendous, tremendous young guy.
You had some very hard-nosed players during your time at Duke. Obviously, you've got a great line there, guys who are in the NFL, and we talked about Jacoby Cofield earlier, but Lucas Patrick, Matt Skura, Laken Tomlinson, Dave Harding, whose body is probably just very glad to not be getting beat up in the life of an offensive lineman right now. But you also had guys like Braxton Deaver, Anthony Boone, Jamison Crowder, David Reeves, Brandon Kennett, Jeremy Cash, Carlos Ray. I mean, you had, I think Ben Humphreys was there for a little bit. And
a couple of years for me, yeah.
I could go on for a long time naming some great players. Ross Cockrell, who's now a Super Bowl champion, Juwan Thompson. Where did you find in all those players there seemed to be a real drive on every play? Is that something that you looked for, that you recruited for?
Well, I think it's two things. I think it's you look for that kind of high school football player that plays with great effort, and then I think you gotta practice that way. And Coach Cutt's big on that. I know I was big on that with the offensive line. Is as you remember when I talked about Coach Ford, very demanding, hard-nosed, tough, and I wanted to try to have that kind of an offensive line, and I think that's very important, even in today's football. One thing I do, because I have a lot of time on my hand, I watch a lot of football on Saturdays and record a lot of games, and I just see a lot of the toughness leaving the game, and I think the people that can maintain that and capture that and keep that have a winning edge, and I think that's critical.
Well, I want to ask you, I'm going to get into a few more specific moments with you as we go on, but I want to ask you about Coach Cutcliffe's experience at Ole Miss and how it ended, and if you felt that influenced his approach as the head coach at Duke at all.
I don't think we ever had that conversation. I do think this. I do think David, because he didn't really change at all from what I remember at Ole Miss, and then when I got to Duke, he was the same, doing the same things in the same way, and so I really feel like that he probably assessed it and felt like he did everything the right way, and he wasn't going to change, because he didn't change. Now, I wasn't there at the beginning of Duke, the first 3 or 4 seasons. I can't remember how many it was before I got there. So I don't know what it was like when he first got there. But when I got to Duke, I mean, it was like being at Ole Miss with him. And, I can tell you what he was going to do next, because we were used to doing certain things certain times of the year.
Looking back on your time at Duke, what are you most proud of on the field, off the field, anything?
I think it's the total package at Duke. I mean, you mentioned Kobe Cofield. I mean, I love Kobe Cofield, Matt Skura, Lucas Patrick. You mentioned a lot of the good linemen. I'm going to tell you one of the linemen that may have played the best week in and week out. Perry Simmons was a heck of a football player. They tore his knee up and couldn't play in the Peach Bowl against A&M. Perry Simmons was a tough, good football player, and so it's the whole Duke experience. You're around some of the best people you'll ever be around. Goal-oriented kids that want to be coached, and you didn't have to babysit them. Like some schools, you got to get up and maybe make sure they're going to class. You didn't have to do that. Those kids get it, and to me, it's one of the greatest places, and I was so happy to finish my career there because it left a great taste in my mouth of young people that are just going to be winners all their life.
Do you stay in touch with Coach Cutcliffe these days?
You know what? I respect the job he has and the time. We'll text periodically, and at times we'll talk. Really, the last time we spoke is when he hired Greg Fry. I was a big fan of Greg Fry's and known him for years, and I called and strongly recommended that he hired Greg. Obviously, he interviewed him and liked him and went that direction, and I was happy because I know that line's being coached hard and coached well, and it's important to me. Even though I've been gone for 5 years. I'm very proud of what we accomplished there. I'm very proud of how our line played there, and I want to see that continue.
All right. Well, it's funny you mentioned Coach Fry. When I was interviewing Kobe, he said that when Coach Fry got hired, you reached out to Kobe and said, "You're going to like this guy. Check him out." And Kobe said, "You're just puffing this up because it's one of your guys, whatever." Words to that effect, and then he went and met him and said, "Yep, this guy's the real deal." So if there's anything you'd like to say to Kobe about coaches knowing best, now's your opportunity to do it.
With the Kobe experience, and we talked about that earlier. And experience is valuable, and I know Greg Fry. I know what he's made out of, and I know he's a really good football coach, and I'm proud that he's there, and I'm proud that he's coaching that offensive line.
I think I'm one of the few people who thinks that who is not borderline suicidal as a fan about the O-line situation. I actually think he is doing a good job, and I think that it's moving in the right direction. And so I hope that I'm right about that, and I hope that you're correct about that as well, and we have a good season coming up next year. But you're obviously very proud of Duke. Your Twitter profile still has a picture of you coaching at Duke on there. What would you say to a student athlete who's considering coming to Durham and they have other schools on their list?
Well, I think you really got to, if you have a chance to go to Duke, you got to seriously take that and look at it very hard. And I don't know if it could be said any better than what David Cutcliffe tells recruits. You're not making a 4-year decision. You're making a 40-year decision. And what Duke can do for you and the rest of your life and your family and your children someday, it's just different. And I've been at Notre Dame, and I've been at some of those other places. Duke is truly different, and it's a special place.
All right. If I don't ask this next question, people are going to scream at me. They are going to yell at me. They're going to call me a weasel and a loser. And some of those things may be true, but that doesn't mean that I like to hear them all the time. So let me just ask you this, because every year it's like clockwork. The moment Duke goes into a little bit of a skid or a downward spiral or too many sacks are given up, the fan base starts saying, if only Coach Latina was still there. And I will not bore you with all the different conspiracy theories. I'm sure you're aware of them, or all the different thoughts about why you're not still at Duke and what happened in 2015 when you end up stepping down and Coach Zach Roper becomes the the offensive coordinator, I just want to give you an opportunity once and for all to set the record straight and tell us all what made you decide to step down when you did.
Well, what people don't know is I was wanting to do that 2 years prior to when I did it. I just was ready to move on into a different phase of my life. I had a grandchild that was living in Nashville. I hardly ever got to see him because of the time restraints that coaching puts on you. And I was ready. I tried to do it 2 years before that, retire. Marcus Johnson was my assistant. I recruited Marcus, I coached Marcus, and Coach didn't think Marcus was ready for the job yet. And so instead of him hiring somebody else, I decided to stay and try to help Marcus become ready. So when I did walk away, it would be a seamless transition for both the staff and the players because it would be teaching the same things. And I stayed 2 more years that was my primary reason to stay in, or I was going to leave after the 13 season. And I know I've seen a lot of those theories and conspiracy theories. David Cutcliffe, I have more respect for him than just about anybody on the face of the earth. I love David. I loved working with him. I never felt like I worked for him. I worked with him, and we had a great relationship. I have great respect for him. I hope he has for me, but people don't know. In my life, I was tuning myself to family and away from football. And I tried to do it 2 years prior to that, but I wanted Marcus to be the guy that replaced me.
Well, he was pretty young back then, young in the context of coaching experience. He was pretty young back then, right?
Right. He was young and inexperienced, which is why David asked me if I would stay for the 14 season. I approached him again about leaving, and he asked me to give him 1 more year to get Marcus ready, and I told him I would because Marcus was that important to me. Again, I recruited Marcus. I coached him. I love him. He's like a son, and I wanted Marcus to get that position.
When he's taken that opportunity and run with it, I think he's at Missouri now.
He is at Missouri, yes. He's climbed the ladder. He's assistant head coach, co-coordinator, and he got all those titles that I had, I guess.
Well, that's great to hear. And so for all the fans out there, I guess we're going to have to believe something else that's crazy to process when we're upset about something.
Well, it'll have to be something else because that's the truth. And I'm not sure there's another person I'd rather work for right now. Not right now, but if I was working, it would be David Cutcliffe.
Well, and I'm just curious, in doing some research to get ready for some of the interviews I did with some of the players from the 90s and early 2000s era at Duke, I was reading Coach Goldsmith's book, and I came across an article about when he retired from coaching finally, and he just said, look, as a head coach or anybody involved with football, you're always scribbling plays on napkins, and when you get to a point where you realize you're not doing that anymore, it's time to hang it up and let someone else do the job. And I tell that story to just say, when did you, in your mind, say, when did you realize, hey, I think I'm ready to do something else?
Well, I can tell you it was exactly after the 13th season. What better time for me to have such a pretty magical year at Duke, to play in the conference championship game at Duke, and play against Texas A&M, and really had that game still sits poorly with me, and how we didn't win that game. But
yeah,
it was then, and it wasn't so much football. It was just I wanted to go and enjoy grandkids and family and just enjoy life because I had 38 years in the coaching profession, and that's a long time, especially especially in that profession. That's a long time.
Yeah, time is relative. 38 years of coaching is a lot longer than maybe 38 years of doing something else. And
I think so.
yeah, it's certainly a grind. Now, I didn't plan to ask about this because I don't always get into the specifics of games because, to be honest with you, I kind of enjoy these more overarching thematic conversations that I get to have with people. But I'll tell you what I told Carlos Ray when I interviewed him, which was I grew up watching the Cubs, and so I knew loss, and I knew to expect the worst. Okay, me and my buddy Tim, we just knew that whole game something's going to happen, right? And Tim's an alum, and he's a great guy, but we were all kind of on the edge of our seat waiting for something to go wrong. And then you guys are up 38-17, and everything that can go right seems to be going right. And then at watching that game again for an interview that I did, I didn't realize how dominant the A&M O-line was the whole time, and how once A&M stopped trying to hit a home run on every play, and once they calmed down and just started taking what was there, the tide started to turn. What was that like for you guys as a coach, as a coaching staff? What was the way that game played out like for you guys?
That was a hard game for me, and for us, and you said when momentum changes, and when it did change, it changed, and you see it slipping away, and now you're trying to figure out what's the, what can you put out there that's going to work, and something they haven't seen or planned for, and that you've worked. So many things go through your mind. It's just incredible, the thought process, and really all that doesn't matter. It's just what matters is putting sound plays out there and going and execute. And sometimes I think as a coach we become our worst enemies and want to do something different. And just put sound plays out there and trust your players and go do it. And that's usually the best answer. But that was frustrating. There's two games I hate to mention. That's the second most frustrating game. I think you can guess the first.
I'm going to ask you about that because if you've listened to any of these interviews, it comes up a lot. All right, so we will get to that. I promise you. I'm not going to let you leave without talking about that one. But what was it like for Anthony Boone? Because the interceptions he threw to end his career at Duke in both bowl games, both those seasons, in 2013 and then again in 2014 in the Sun Bowl, I can't imagine how hard that had to be for him as a player. How did he handle that, and how did you guys as coaches try to get him through that?
Well, Anthony is an exceptional young man, and very mature. And I know it probably hurt him more than he let on to. But you prepare kids. They go out, as long as they're going to go out and prepare hard, play hard, and do their very best. Sometimes it just doesn't go your way. We had a lot of things go our way there. My 4 years at Duke, not all of them, but we had a lot. And I know Anthony, he would have been hard on himself, but man, he prepared so hard. He trained so hard, and he gave you everything he got. That's all I can ask as a coach with my players. That's all I can ever ask.
Pound for pound, it seemed like Anthony Boone got the most out of everything. And I'm not denigrating any of the other quarterbacks there, but he seemed to get the most out of what he had. And he watching some of those games again and some of those highlights, you talked about his preparation. He really seemed to know what to do, when to do it, and really wanted to win every play. When did you know with him, hey, this kid's special?
Well, Anthony was there before I got there. He was young, but just their habits. You know, when you're at practice, you know when guys don't do well, and you look and see how they react to that. Some kids blow it off, and some kids, you see it affects them, and how important it is for him to do well. Anthony was one of those guys. He's kind of a perfectionist, and you know it was important to him. And like I said, you know how he prepared, you know how he trained, and how important football was, and playing good football. I never, to me, that's going to happen, but I want Anthony Boone. I want him to be behind my center. I like to have Anthony Boone behind my center.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned when the tide turns in another game that you were most frustrated about. I think I know, I can guess, an educated guess as to what that is, but why don't you tell us what game you might be referring to?
Well, it was Miami game at Duke Stadium, and I have theories about that I'm convinced that I believe that the officials thought they would never be able to leave that field alive if they changed the call. That's what I believe. Not to be wrong, but I believe, because if you go back and look, they huddled. They went and looked at the video. They came back and huddled some more. Then they went back and looked at the video. It took about 10, 12 minutes to get it rolling.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind. I think they were fearful of their lives.
Okay, and I talked with Thomas Sirk about this, and when the game was on the line, he went into, I'll just call it Sirk mode. I mean, he came alive in a way that it was hard to explain. With the game on the line, he was, I don't want to say a different player, but he was definitely in his element, right? And he drives you guys down the field. Miami makes some dumb penalties. Max McCaffrey's doing what Max McCaffrey would do, which is make a play. You got Reeves, Deaver. I think it was Shaq Powell who was running the ball. I mean, all those big time moment players are stepping up. And that weird clock situation, and Sirk runs it into the end zone and scores. And he said he got over the line, although he said even if I didn't, I wouldn't say I didn't. So I don't I don't know what to think about that. But I'm sitting there, and again, me and Tim are watching it, and we're thinking, all right, man, this is great. This is a big win. We're gonna be 7-1. We're in coastal contention. Yeah. I mean, you talk about. I talk to people all the time in the legal field about case intake being peaks and valleys, right? Sometimes it's real high, sometimes it's real low. That moment was a peak. And then what happened next was a valley. I want you, if you can, to take us onto the sideline as you see the kick unfold. What's going through your mind at that point in time?
Well, I know I can remember precisely, because I can remember like as if it were yesterday. I'm sitting there saying to myself, "There's no way. There's no way they can do this. There's no way they can pull it." And you see one lateral, two lateral, whatever, if they're laterals or not laterals, and you see one after the other. Then all of a sudden you see it break clean, and then you look back and you see a couple flags on the ground. And then you think, okay, they had their fun. Well, it's over. And then my theory comes into play, and nobody can convince me otherwise. That's my theory, and I think it's true.
Well, when I've talked to some other players about this, the gap control was real good for a while. The play was going on for a bit. And I can't remember who it was that made what should have been a tackle, and the Miami player's knee was down. Could you guys see? Could you tell that from the sideline? I know he was on the Miami side.
Yeah, that was on the other side. I couldn't tell on the sideline. Maybe upstairs, but you know what? After that game, I didn't want to talk about it. I had 2 games in my career I felt that way, and that was one of them. The other, and both were David Cutcliffe. We played Arkansas to 7 overtimes and lost the game. The last thing I wanted to do was talk about that game.
And I remember after that game at Ole Miss, it seemed like you guys were a little gassed for the rest of the season, which I think you played two games.
It hurt us.
Yeah.
It hurt us.
Yeah. You played 2 games in one night, I think. I mean, I could see why. But the aftermath of the Miami game, and A.J. Wolf, I think, said that he thought that the officials had some money on the game or something. But how did you guys pick up the pieces after that? Because I think if they just score a touchdown on it, that's one thing. But to me, it felt like the flags go down, the flags get picked up, they come out of the booth, I think, 3 times. There's a player on the field. He was clearly down. I mean, that whole, how much did that process contribute to then the 4-game losing streak?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with it, which is bad on ourselves and our players to let that affect the rest of the next 4 games. But it did affect us. I mean, it drained us, took a lot out of us. I think if we get that win, we could have had another magical year and played in the championship game again.
When I talked to Thomas Sirk, he said that there were more media people on media day than there normally were. They were all talking and asking questions about Miami, and it was always on TV. What did you guys do to try to tune out the noise to get the team back to normal?
We obviously have to talk about the game, and because you have to show the game and you have to learn from any of the mistakes that took place in the game, offensively and defensively. As a staff, we then had a message: we don't want to hear about it. So I coming back, we're not getting the win, and let's move on. You have to do that, and I know everybody all the coaches. That was a directive from Coach Cutt, and it was the right directive. And we all saluted with that one and tried to do that. It's hard though. It's hard. We can't control what they do at the lunch table and the dinner table. It was hard for the kids to get over that one. They wanted that one. They felt like they deserved it. They felt like it was taken away.
Well, they felt that way because it was taken away.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was, I've said it enough. Everybody's heard my thoughts on it already who's going to listen to this. But that process was really frustrating. But did you guys ever squib kick again?
Well, that's a good question. I couldn't answer that. I don't know the answer to that. I hope not.
I remember saying something like, just kick it out of bounds. And but then there was the tackle, and it's like, well, wait, why is this play not over? Some of the players would have had to have noticed that, and I know you tell them to play to the whistle, but, I mean, when you see something like that, your instinct's got to be the play's over to some extent, right?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt.
Well, you rebounded. It was a magical win. It was a great way to end your time at Duke, the first bowl win, I think, since either 1960 or 1961. It was fantastic. Then you end up coaching at USC, and for those of us who spent time at South Carolina, we know what USC refers to. And tell us how you ended up down there coaching.
Well, that was really a unique thing. Kurt Roper was the coordinator. Kurt had left Duke, and he was the offensive coordinator at South Carolina and was running the same offense that we ran at Duke. So when their offensive line coach left and took a head job, I think he took the Georgia State head football job. He left immediately. So here they are now getting ready to go to a bowl game without an offensive line coach. And it was just a seamless. I did it for Kurt. Coach Muschamp, as I mentioned before, tried to hire me when I took the Akron job when he was in Florida. He thought he can entice me to go to South Carolina because Kurt was there. But at that time, I knew I was done. For Kurt, for Kurt, he asked me to do it, and I went down and coached for a couple of weeks, coached in a bowl game, and then came back to my retirement.
Did they try to get you to stay?
Yeah, he did. He tried to get me to stay multiple times, and Kurt knew that I wouldn't do it. If I was going to stay in coaching, I'd have stayed at Duke. If I was going to stay in coaching, it wasn't. It was a lot more money and all those things, but to me, it was. I was ready. As I told you, I was ready 2 years prior to that, but David asked me to stay on, and I did.
Is there anything, and I ask this question, I'm in the legal field, and I see a lot of lawyers have a hard time letting go and giving up and moving into retirement. Is there anything that you miss about coaching, or that you ever kind of think, gosh, maybe I'd like to get back into this?
Well, I don't ever think about I want to get back into it, or I'd like to get back into it. I've been fortunate to have an opportunity every year since I've been out of it for 5 years to get back in it. What I do miss is the Kobe Cofield, Matt Skura, Perry Simmons. I miss watching a 17, 18-year-old come in where they think they have all the answers, and then you watch them walk out, and they got a pretty good idea of all the answers. And you see that maturity, you see that maturation that takes place from a kid to a young man, and that's pretty good stuff.
Well, we've been on the phone for over an hour and 20 minutes now. I've covered, I think, everything that I'd like to cover. But what I like to do here is give people an opportunity to say anything that they want. And, you coach at a lot of places, Virginia Tech, Kansas State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Akron, Ole Miss, Duke, USC. I'm just going to give you an open mic and let you talk about anything that you'd like to talk about.
Well, obviously, college football was and still is very important to me. I've become a fan, and I watch a lot. But college football is one of the greatest things that I think I could have ever been a part of. And again, it goes back to what I just said. You watch a 17 or an 18-year-old young man come in, and they feel pretty good about themselves because they were the stars of their team. And then they come in and they have to make their way. They have to make a new path, and they have to figure it out. And along the way, 4 or 5 years later, if they stay with you and fight the fight and just grow as a person each and every semester, they accomplish so much, and hopefully it sets them up for the rest of their lives. It gives them a real chance to be a contributing factor to our country and to our society. And I can't imagine anything greater for me as a coach to be able to watch that process. As I did it for 37, 38 years, I literally have tried to stay in touch with kids that I coached in 1983. I talked to one who I coached in 1986 at Temple University just the other day. And it's the relationships, it's the it's the 4 or 5 years you get to help a young person figure it out. That's the most satisfying thing. That's what I do miss about it. And I think college football in itself provides that for you. I think as an assistant coach, if you don't take that seriously, you miss a lot of the fun parts of coaching football.
You mentioned you stay in touch with a lot of the people that you've coached. Do you still stay in touch with the Matt Lukes, the Marcus Johnsons, the Kobe Cofields, the folks that the folks that you helped get into coaching?
Oh, absolutely. Marcus calls me 3 times a week. as soon as Marcus sees something a little bit different than he's seen, we could be sit and talk 3 or 4 days a week, especially during the season, on little things that asked my opinion how I would handle it. And so I talked to Matt, I talked to Marcus, talked to Kurt Roper. To me, it's about the friendships that you make and the genuine friendships. It's hard for me to let those things go. I haven't coached, like I said, I talked to one from Temple University from 1986, and I left the conversation really feeling good that this young man's doing great, and we were a part of helping that. You know, it's a good feeling.
Well, anything else that you'd like to tell us about your time at Duke? We spent a lot of time talking about Duke, but we spent a lot of time talking about other things, which was very, very fascinating. But the podcast is Duke football coverage, so I feel like I ought to give you a chance to say something else about the Blue Devils.
Well, I will say this: of all the places I worked, which were many, I enjoyed my time at Duke probably more than any other place. And it's not even a close second. The people at Duke, the campus setting at Duke, the campus environment at Duke, and maybe because we had a great run for 4 years and 4 bowl games, maybe that makes it feel a little bit better. But again, it goes down to the people. I loved my time at Duke, and I know some of your listeners may say, "Then why did he leave?" And it was strictly family. I love Duke, and my wife and I watch Duke every week. We get it on TV. It's going to be on my 74-inch screen, 75-inch screen, and we're watching the Duke Blue Devils. I love Duke. I love being a part of it. I love the support people there, Hap Zazor, and all the support people. It was just a wonderful place, and I'm glad that was the last place that I worked, because I'd have been disappointed to work anywhere else after that.
Well, we appreciate everything that you did for the Blue Devils and everything that you guys did as a collective unit. And that was, and I don't think I appreciated it enough at the time, but looking back on it, that was a real magical 4 years. And I wish, as a fan, I had been a little bit more in the moment and enjoyed the entirety of the season, as opposed to maybe getting upset about a game here and there that you guys lost. But that was just, as a long-suffering Duke football fan, I cannot thank you enough for what you guys did during your time at Duke. That was just that was something else, because believe me, I sat through a lot of winless seasons. I sat through a lot of misery, and as a fan, that was a really special time period, and I just want to say thank you for everything you guys did there.
Well, obviously coaches love doing that, and I appreciate the time tonight. It was fun for me to do this, to rehash all those good times, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you.
Well, I thank you for coming on, and for those of you who are out there, who are listening, who are associated with the Duke football program in any way, past, present, and maybe some of you recruits who are planning to come to Duke, you know how to get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter, @DukeFBCoverage. My direct messages are open. You can send me an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. You can go to our website, Bull City Coordinators. And hey, there's going to be fans in the seats. Go to our TeePublic site, buy some merch, represent the brand. We would very much appreciate it. And anybody who wants to get in contact, I enjoy doing this, and I love talking Duke football, and I love talking with people like Coach Latina and having great, interesting conversations. We appreciate your time. We thank you for your patronage, and we will be back in July with some more interviews, and we've got interviews going into August before we take our break to go back to the blog solely for football season, and then I'll get to work getting some more of these interviews lined up. So if you were associated in the past, if you were associated currently, or you will be associated with Duke football in the future, reach out and we will set up an interview. We appreciate the listener support and your continued patronage of the site, and we will be back next month.